Tonight, Red China gives President Trump the red carpet treatment.
We're having a great time.
But is it actually time to really turn the screws on Beijing? We're breaking down Donald diplomacy ahead of his big event with the Chinese president, and we'll take you there live. Economy growing? Check. Consumer confidence climbing? Check. Stock market soaring? Check. Trump's poll numbers tanking? Check. Steyerwalt analyzes why. Donna Brazil doubling down on her blistering criticism of the DNC and the Clinton campaign.
It was dismissive. I don't condescending.
We've got fresh reaction tonight as her bombshell memoir continues to send new shockwaves through the Democrat Party. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. This is a very big hour for President Trump's attempt to redefine America's place in the world. And it's all based on this, the concept of America first through strength. President Trump will speak at a signing ceremony with Chinese business leaders shortly and join Chinese President Xi later in the hour. And you're going to see both of those events live here on Fox News at Night. We'll take you there when they happen. As we await the two presidents, let's check in with Chief White House correspondent John Roberts in Beijing on a day that included an historic first for a U.S. president. Hello, John.
Good evening to you, Shannon. Good morning, actually. Still, it's just turning noon here in Beijing, 13 hours ahead of you. That historic first. The president and the first lady will be the guests of honor at a state dinner tonight in the Forbidden City. And it will be the very first time that a U.S. president has ever had a state dinner inside the Forbidden City. So that'll be something interesting to see tonight, as we'll likely get some footage from that. We're expecting the president and Xi Jinping to come out in the next little while with joint statements. It won't be a press conference. They won't be taking questions. The Chinese leader doesn't really like taking questions. I remember being here back in the early 2000s with President George W. Bush, and he and Jiang Zemin came out, and they each took 2 questions apiece. They're right now in the middle of what's called an extended bilateral meeting, and that is that the two leaders, together with their delegations, are going over some of the thornier issues. We saw about an hour ago as they were beginning that bilateral meeting, President Xi spoke mostly in generalities about the importance of the U.S.-China relationship, not only for the two countries, but for the world. The president, though, talking about what was a restricted bilateral meeting earlier in the day, got a little more specific on the issues of North Korea and trade. Let's listen here.
And to those nations that choose to ignore this threat, or worse still, to enable it, the weight of this crisis is on your conscience.
And again, we're expecting those statements to come about half past the hour here. How these meetings go could have a real bearing on how the North Korea crisis unfolds in the weeks and months ahead. President Trump wants to push Xi Jinping to do more than China already has, starting with, as a very baseline level, the full enforcement of United Nations sanctions against North Korea. But the president also wants China to take further steps, things like cutting off oil supplies, at least temporarily, to North Korea, freezing the bank accounts of some North Korean individuals, as the United States Treasury Department has, and taking all of the North Korean workers who are here in China and sending them home. What's not clear at this point, Shannon, is whether or not, A, Xi Jinping has the influence over Kim Jong-un to get him to rein in his nuclear program, and B, how much influence Xi Jinping really wants to wield, because he appreciates the fact that North Korea is a real cultural and political buffer between the U.S.-aligned South Korea and China. And, you know, he's looking, because they look in terms of 20 and 50-year plans here in China as opposed to 3 and 5 weeks, as we do in the United States. He's looking way down the road to say, well, listen, if we get rid of North Korea's nuclear program and Korea reunifies under the terms of the South, which is aligned to the United States, I'm going to have basically the United States right on my border, and I'm not sure that that's a particularly good thing to have happen. So he's got a very difficult calculation. The president's got a difficult calculation as well. We'll see if they can come to some sort of an agreement on how to move forward, at least in the interim, to get North Korea to ratchet down the tensions that it's fueling because of its nuclear program. Shannon?
The long game versus the short game. All right, John Roberts live for us in China. Thank you so much. President Trump is getting some praise from some longtime skeptics for his Asian diplomacy so far. And on the domestic front, the American people are giving the highest approval rating for the U.S. economy since before the 9/11 attacks. That is according to a brand new poll out tonight. Vice President Mike Pence has been hammering the message that this administration is getting things done. We talked with him yesterday right here on Fox News at Night.
This economy is starting to take off. Largely because of the progress President Trump has made in the last year, rolling back federal red tape, unleashing American energy, making investments in our national defense. But I think most Americans know the time has come for us to cut taxes across the board for working families, small businesses, and family farms. And then in doing that, we're going to have the kind of sustained growth that's going to lead America back to the prosperity that we all long to see.
So with good news on the economy, unemployment, the stock market, and business optimism, why is the president's overall approval rating less than stellar? According to the latest Fox News poll, just 38% say they approve of the president, while 57% say they disapprove. We turn to Fox News politics editor Chris Steyerwalt for a little bit of psychoanalysis, which, Chris, we can always use from you.
No.
I'm going to start calling you the doctor.
No. If I put it on somebody else, you put it on me. So I'll just talk about the numbers.
Yeah, let's talk about this. So a new poll out tonight shows that 68% think the economy is in good shape, and that is the highest number since before 9/11. So with all of these good economic indicators and the administration constantly pointing to those, where is the disconnect in at least people not really crediting, it seems, the president with that, at least not when it comes to his overall rating?
Well, there's more to life than money, and how people feel about the economy is definitely very important, but it's not the only thing. I would also say this. Donald Trump has never been particularly popular by those standards, right? So he has a low job approval rating. He had low favorability ratings, and he beat Hillary Clinton, and it was enough. And then in politics, it doesn't matter. It's sort of like the two guys and the bear, right? They're running away. They say, I hope I can outrun this bear. And he said, no, I don't need to outrun that bear. I just need to outrun you.
Right.
And what Donald Trump was able to do to win the presidency was outrun Hillary Clinton. And all he has to do to get reelected is beat the Democrat that the Democrats put up. That's all. It's that simple. I doubt we'll ever see a time that Donald Trump is a 60%, that he will be like the high points that George W. Bush saw or Barack Obama saw. I expect that this is probably the lower end of his register, but the high end of his register is probably only the mid to upper 70s or mid to upper 40s. Mm-hmm. So this is probably where he's at. And we should remember, it was enough before for him, and it might be enough again.
Yeah, we are looking now live in Beijing, where he is going to speak to, we understand, a business leaders group of some kind. And so when that happens, we may cut in to see what his remarks are there tonight. But for the most part, Chris, I mean, he's getting not a lot of attention about exactly how he's doing on this Asian trip. And it seems like most people want to give him credit that he's been nuanced. A lot of folks think that the speech he gave last night in Seoul was an important one, and it spelled out very important American policies. But it doesn't seem like this mainstream media, even if he's doing a good job on this trip, is ever going to be gushing over the so-called Donald diplomacy.
Well, we would never want media gushing over the president, whichever party it was. I would start as a baseline. Gushing is gross, but we would also say that the president has a much tougher job in Beijing than he did in Seoul. In Seoul, South Korea needs us, wants us, loves us, and all of that. In Beijing, the president has a problem. His campaign promises were predicated on essentially a trade war with China, getting very, very tough, very, very hard on China, pushing back hard on China. But of course, the reality of the world is we need their money, their product, and we need their help on North Korea. So the president has had to choose a different tack as it relates to dealing with China. And he has, shall we say, I think the term in Washington, we say has grown in office. So he has, when somebody abandons campaign promises, we say they've grown in office. He's definitely grown in office as it relates to China, because the situation is probably more complex than he initially understood.
And yes, you make a good point that gushing if you're a true journalist, gushing over any president is not a good thing. I believe you used the word gross. But I think we can all agree there was a lot of gushing over the last president and everything he did on the international stage. That's definitely not going to be the case this time around, at least not with the mainstream media and with this president. And so we're very focused, obviously, on the North Korea issue. But another big one for the president while he's there in China is going to be trade.
Oh, yeah. And what do you do about China? So we say we're going to have fairer deals. We're going to have all of these things. And the business community that's so happy that stock prices are up, profits are sky high, the economy is doing so well. We've got growth. We've got basically zero. We've got full employment. All of these things are good. And the president says, well, I may blow up NAFTA and I may still do the trade war with China. We'll just see how it goes. And so the same business community that is cheered by the fact that Trump has rolled back these regulations and is promising tax cuts and all of that, then they look at the trade side and they go, what happens if you really do that? So this actually is a point of leverage for him at home. It's a tough spot abroad, but it is a point of leverage for him at home. When he wants stuff from the business community, when he wants stuff from traditional conservative Republicans, this trade stuff is a place where he's got some real leverage on him because they're anxious.
Yeah, and Chris, as you are explaining exactly all the things he's facing in China and this difficult, nuanced relationship. We're watching there live as he is about to give remarks at a business leaders event. We understand there'll be some signing ceremony as well, so we are watching and waiting for that. The cameras are all queued up. Both of the men are there and waiting. You see the flags and you see the press ready to go, so we will break into that momentarily as soon as that happens. In the meantime, there's this whole issue of China's trade with North Korea as well. So we've got to hammer that out, and we'll have more on that coming up in just a minute. We will take you back to Beijing as soon as the president speaks there. In the meantime, the former interim head of the Democratic National Committee is leveling more bombshells tonight against her own party. Donna Brazile charges the Clinton campaign was a cult. And if you missed it, wow. On Tucker Carlson tonight, she tried to explain why the Democrats did not turn their email servers over to the FBI amid the Democrats' repeated allegations that they had been hacked by Russia. Listen to this.
Your concerns about hacking the servers over at the DNC. If you believe the Russians did that, why didn't the Democratic National Committee allow the FBI to examine those servers? Why were they given over to a vendor and not the U.S. government's investigators?
You know, that is a great question, and let me tell you, it's in the book as well. When the DNC officer, who was Debbie Wasserman Schultz, when it was brought to her attention, she immediately reached out to get cybersecurity experts on board. She reached out to a former number 3 at the FBI who is currently working with a group, an organization called CrowdStrike.
Yes.
Along with our cyber attorney, they provided the FBI with everything that they requested. Remember, we were still using our system.
Come on now. Come on now. If you think, so bottom line is it's Debbie Wasserman Schultz who made that decision. I think that's the headline here. But if you really think that the intelligence service of a foreign government is breaking into your computers in the middle of a campaign, you want actual federal investigators to get to the bottom of it. But you're saying that she stopped that.
No, she did not stop it. She cooperated. She cooperated. She turned over everything. But Tucker, we were still running a party. We still had our mainframe, you know, being managed, being remediated.
But you could allow the FBI access to that.
All right, and it went on from there. Joining us now to break it down, townhall.com political editor and Fox News contributor Guy Benson, and Forward Solutions Strategy Group partner Isaac Wright. Good to see you both tonight.
Hello.
I'm not sure that conversation, there was more to it. But Guy, my understanding is, was everything turned over to the FBI?
Not the actual server itself. They said they basically cloned it and gave it to this vendor, which doesn't make sense to me. Still, the explanation there, Tucker asked the right question. Donna did her best to spin it, I think, and saying, well, we had a party to run. It doesn't explain why did the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, not have full access, everything that they could possibly need while investigating this apparent hack by the Russian government, which is now an obsession of the Democratic Party. And look, I'm one of these conservatives who says this is an important thing to get to the bottom of. We should have the Russia investigation. Robert Mueller should do his work. This is a piece of that investigation that has never made sense to me.
Well, and by the way, she refers to CrowdStrike, the vendor that was looking into this, which that vendor has links to Fusion GPS.
Right.
So that raises more questions. But Isaac, there were a lot of Democrats who weren't thrilled that she was out there talking about these things and revealing the internal strife that was going. She used some pretty strong language. There were worries that it would hurt some of the potential elections that were held yesterday. That didn't happen. But do you think she's doing longer-term damage to the party by kind of airing the dirty laundry?
I first met Donna Brazile when I was a young person on my first campaign, and I would drop off printed memos at her office because that was back in the days when we used to print things. I think she has dedicated her life to this party. I don't think there's any ill intent. Whatever you believe or disagree about the facts of the book, we'll all see when it comes out. Going back to the server question you asked earlier, I watched that segment and I thought that was a really circular conversation because in the end, they gave them a copy of the server, not the physical server. And so if you have a computer hacked, it's the computer that is hacked. It's not the physical body. It is the software. It is the files. All of that was provided to the FBI. The FBI said under oath they got what they wanted and what they needed, not the physical shell the computer was in, but the computer itself, which is what they provided.
Okay. Now, I want to read a little bit of a Bernie Sanders statement because he's been pretty quiet. I mean, we haven't seen him running out in front of cameras there to say I was right and this was stolen from me. A little bit of a statement, though. He says, what the recently released book excerpt from former interim DNC chair Donna Brazile made clear is that unless we get our act together, we're not going to be effective in either taking on Donald Trump or in stopping the extremist right-wing Republican agenda. We have to reestablish faith with the American people that, in fact, we can make positive changes in this country through a fair and transparent political process that reflects the will of voters across this country. Guy, your reaction?
Well, I think he has lots of reasons to be upset about the revelations in this book, and apparently there was an awkward phone call between Ms. Brazile and Senator Sanders about what was not known at the time and was discovered after the fact, that there was this special sweetheart deal that he didn't know about during the campaign with the Hillary people. But I think the point that he makes is perfectly fine. If you want to be a viable political party, you need to have a strong political operation. If you want to win a bunch of elections, I think what we saw in Virginia last night was, even if the National Party is not in great shape in a lot of ways, if the winds are blowing a certain way, you can win anyhow. And I made this point with Bill Hemmer this morning. The RNC was not in a great place in 2009 or 2010. And guess what happened? Big-time Republican blowouts both of those years. Sometimes parties win in spite of themselves, and I think the Democrats are on that path right now. If they want to maximize their opportunities, they should so-called get their act together, to quote Senator Sanders.
Well, Isaac, quickly, do you think that they will use Donna Brazile's allegations as a bit of a point of self-reflection?
I hope that what comes out of this book is the notation of the state the party was in when she took it over. Our party was $20 million in debt and nearly broke, and we had allowed that to happen. The biggest thing I think we can take away is the fact that we as Democrats have to maintain our national party, our national apparatus. When we do and we have the resources to get our message out, we win. That's exactly what happened last night, and I think that's actually the biggest takeaway from the book.
All right, and of course, everybody wants to speculate ahead to 2018, but we'll leave it in 2017 for right now. Isaac and Guy, great to see you both.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks for coming in. All right, we are keeping an eye on the president in China. We'll take you there live as soon as he speaks. In the meantime, the vice president traveled to Sutherland Springs, Texas today, just 3 days after the deadliest church shooting in U.S. history. As the funerals and mourning begin, we're learning more details about the shooter and the victims. Matt Finn's live in Texas with more. Hello, Matt.
Shannon, the vice president and his wife, the U.S. Attorney General, and the Texas governor all came together today to visit with families who had their loved ones murdered in this church behind me this past Sunday. The group first visited with victims' families one-on-one. It was very heavy and emotional. The vice president hugged and shook hands with family, and he also visited the church property. He then spoke to a large crowd at a nearby high school. Here's some of what the vice president had to say.
So we mourn with those who mourn, and we grieve with those who grieve, but we do not grieve like those who have no hope. Because our faith gives us hope. And heroes give us hope.
The vice president did blame the gunman and the Air Force for letting the shooter slip through the cracks. Also today, the list of the 26 victims' names was released. Sadly, as we have been reporting, the list shows how some families had multiple members killed. For example, there were 6 people with the last name Holcomb, including a pregnant woman and a 1-year-old child. And there is even more troubling information about the shooter's violent and criminal past continuing to emerge. The sheriff in the shooter's hometown is reviewing why a 2012 sexual assault case against the shooter wasn't thoroughly investigated. Tonight, there are 12 shooting victims, including 2 minors who remain in the hospital, and some are still in critical condition. Shannon?
All right, Matt Finn live for us in Texas. Thank you very much. President Trump creating quite the social media buzz in China, a place where Twitter is supposed to be banned. So a live report on why he is so popular there online. Plus, the president and his Chinese counterpart setting aside their differences, soon delivering a joint press conference. We will take you live to China to hear from President Trump when that happens. Right now, President Trump is speaking at a signing ceremony with Chinese business leaders. Trade deals are on the agenda, so let's listen in.
But in actuality, I do blame past administrations for allowing this out-of-control trade deficit to take place and to grow. We have to fix this because it just doesn't work for our great American companies, and it doesn't work for our great American workers. It is just not sustainable. I look forward to working toward that goal and to pursuing fair and lasting engagement. At home, my administration is supporting American workers and American businesses by eliminating burdensome regulations and lifting restrictions on American energy and all other businesses. Restrictions are being seriously lifted. Our work is already taking hold. The stock market in the United States is at an all-time high, adding already $5.5 trillion in new wealth since the very, very well-known and now very important November 8th election. Unemployment is at a 17-year low, and so many other great things are happening to the United States, economically and otherwise, frankly, too many to mention. Abroad, we're committed to a free and open Indo-Pacific-based respect for the rule of law, private enterprise, and trade reciprocity. In order to achieve prosperity, we must also have security. Security cooperation is critical to addressing a range of emerging threats throughout the Indo-Pacific region and around the world, and I have been very encouraged by my conversations both over the last number of weeks and in particular last night and this morning with President Xi. We're very, very much on the same plane when it comes to security. We both want it for our countries, and we both want it for the world. Chief among these threats is the North Korean nuclear menace. As I stated in my address to the National Assembly in Seoul yesterday, the United States is committed to the complete and permanent denuclearization of North Korea. So important. China can fix this problem easily and quickly, and I am calling on China and your great president to hopefully work on it very hard. I know one thing about your president. If he works on it hard, it will happen. There's no doubt about it. They know. We call on all nations to implement UN Security Council sanctions and resolutions and to cease doing business with the North Korean regime. All nations must come together to ensure that this rogue regime cannot threaten the world with its nuclear weapons. I thank President Xi for his recent efforts to restrict trade with North Korea and to cut off all banking ties. Mr. President, thank you, and thank you to all of the Chinese business leaders here today for standing with the United States and our coalition of responsible nations. But time is quickly running out. We must act fast. And hopefully China will act faster and more effectively on this problem than anyone. I'm also calling on Russia to help rein in this potentially very tragic situation. The contributions of the business community represented here today are vital to our efforts to ensure peace and prosperity for our two nations. Together, we can unlock a future of opportunity, wealth, and dignity far beyond anybody's wildest dreams. In your discussions today, I hope you will learn from each other and identify new ways to advance our economic cooperation. I am depending on all of you to work together to find opportunities of mutual agreement and shared prosperity. The hardworking people of America and the hardworking people of China deserve the very best solutions to achieve prosperity, happiness, and peace. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You've been listening to the president there speaking in Beijing to some business leaders there. And we're going to wait because not too long from now, we're going to take you back to Beijing because the president is going to have joint remarks with President Xi. And as soon as that happens, we will take you there live a little bit later in this hour. We'll be right back after this quick break on Fox News at Night. President Trump's political opinions on China have varied over the years, but now that he's president, his irrepressible style appears to have won over at least one section of Chinese society, and that's a social media group. Live with those details, Trace Gallagher joins us from L.A. Hey, Trace.
Hi, Shannon. You know, as President Trump arrived at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing today, he pretty much got a rock star welcome with crowds of Chinese turning out, cheering and waving American flags. And the outpouring was also echoed on social media across the country, where it appears the Chinese people love Donald Trump. For example, on Weibo, China's version of Twitter, the Trump is here hashtag has been viewed and shared 100 million times. It's among the top trending topics of the day. And the comments appear mostly positive. Social media experts say the reason Trump is so popular is because he epitomizes things the Chinese hold dear, like being a successful businessman and a free spirit who despises political correctness. A Shanghai political commentator told the Reuters news service that for the Chinese, quote, the world is not split into right and wrong, good and evil. It is only success or failure, and the powerful and the weak. The Chinese also love Ivanka Trump and the fact that her children speak Mandarin. Here's a clip Ivanka posted on Instagram for Chinese New Year. Watch. We should note that in China, Twitter was banned back in 2009 as a way for the repressive government to block political dissent. Then in 2012, when President Xi took power, freedom of speech took another hit when all other Western social media was banned and some popular bloggers were jailed. To this day, a defamatory statement against the government can land you in prison for 3 years. Of course, none of that stopped President Trump from tweeting, with the White House saying that it's his way of communicating directly with the people and that they've got the gear aboard Air Force One to allow that to happen. When former President Obama visited China back in 2016, the greeting wasn't nearly as warm. In fact, the New York Times said the reception was, quote, bruising, even by Chinese standards. Shannon.
All right. It is interesting when you think about the social media, the fact that Twitter is supposed to be banned there, but we're told there are at least 10 million Twitter followers somehow in China. So technology sometimes outruns the government. We'll see. Trace, thank you. All right, we're just moments away from the president's joint press statement with his Chinese counterpart. President Trump's tough talk already on North Korea has gone far. According to some people, including former Secretary of State John Kerry, it's gone too far. In an interview with CNN's Christiane Amanpour, Kerry criticized President Trump for his stance toward North Korea and its leader, Kim Jong-un.
I think the rhetoric to date has, frankly, stepped over the line with respect to the messages that are being sent. It's given North Korea a reason to say, hey, we need a bomb, because if we don't have a bomb, we're going to, not be able to protect ourselves, and they'll come after us.
Joining me now, Congressman Ron DeSantis from the House Foreign Affairs Committee and former military advisor Rebecca Heinrichs. Thank you both for being in.
Good evening.
Congressman, let's start with this idea of rhetoric, because we've debated this on the show a couple of times in recent weeks, because this is what the president is doing right now. He's there in North Korea. He's had some very tough talk. And it seems like most of the folks across the aisle from you, the Democrats, think that he's gone way too far, including the former Secretary of State, who we might add. A lot of this evolution of the nuclear program in North Korea happened on his watch.
They did nothing in the Obama administration for 8 years. They let the problem get worse. And obviously, they've created a new problem, I believe, with what they've done with Iran, which will be the North Korea 5 or 10 years from now. So I think it's fine for them to criticize the president, but he sees a problem. He realizes we're on an unsustainable course, so he's working in a variety of ways, including with rhetoric, but also with economic pressure. He's marshaling military resources. I think it's clear from his rhetoric that there's a credible threat of force on the table. I hope we don't have to use that, but if you don't have that, then North Korea is not going to listen to you. So I think it's great for them chirping on the sidelines. they've given the president this mess, and he's trying to deal with it.
And he is, and part of that, Rebecca, of course, is now dealing with China. And he has a very different take on China than he did during the campaign, because now, obviously, as a world leader, they have to work together. We want to play a little bit of how he described China when he was on the campaign trail, hoping to become president.
We can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing. It's the greatest theft in the history of the world.
Okay, so now today, though, we saw just moments ago there, he's praising them for the things they have done to try to help corral North Korea, very publicly saying, you've kicked in these banking sanctions. We really appreciate that. But there's a lot more for you to do, and we hope you're going to do it.
Sure. You know, President Trump, this is sort of businessman Trump. This is what he does. You know, he gets criticized by a lot of people for not having this sort of coherent strategy towards China. But what he does is he comes out really strong, and he hits China, you know, with everything. He sort of goes through the litany of problems that he sees that they have, you know, called them a currency manipulator, they're an IP theft, et cetera. And then what he does is he sort of backs off of that. And so in a way, the Chinese can sort of feel like they're getting a win here, or he's meeting them in the middle. So he goes really hard, and then he sort of backs off to try to get what he really wants. And what President Trump really wants with China right now, what the alligator closest to the boat is, because there's a lot of alligators, it's help with North Korea. And that is where China is really going to play the biggest role here, because China is, to a large degree, the great enabler of North Korea. It's the trade with China that keeps North Korea's nuclear missile program alive. And so that's what President Trump really needs help with when it comes to China.
I mean, the statistic is that 90% of North Korea's trade is done with China. And there's this issue of these massive coal imports into China that they get from North Korea. And Congressman, whether or not China would have the ability to replace something like that enormous amount of coal that is very critical to their economy and operations, because, you know, they have interests that are different than ours, and what they need in that region and what we want in that region can be two very different things. But because of all that trade between the two and that shared border, they may have to be convinced in a different way.
Well, they've always believed that the collapse of the North Korean regime would not be in their interest, because they think that would lead to the reunification of Korea, and that there would be U.S. troops on the Chinese-Korea border at that point. I don't think we really have any intention of putting troops if the Korean Peninsula were reunified, but that's been their view. So I think what the president's trying to do is change that calculation. Look, if we continue to pump money, if you continue to pump money and trade with North Korea, you keep them afloat, they can engage in all this destabilizing activity. That's not in your interest, China. And I think he's leveraging economic, I think he's leveraging political, and I think he is leveraging our military power in the region for doing that. So China's not been willing to really change their calculation up to this point. I think the president's done a lot of good things to get him there. Hopefully this trip we get some progress.
All right, we'd like for you guys to stick around, because there's much more to discuss on this front as the president continues his trip. And again, we're going to take you live back to China when the president speaks in that joint statement with President Xi. By the way, you're going to see that live, so stick around. Fox News at Night, we are standing by live for more remarks from President Trump in China. We'll take you back there when that happens. Meanwhile, the North Korean nuclear threat reaching the shores of Hawaii, surprisingly soon to some, as the state plans to add an attack warning to its monthly alerts for hurricanes, tsunamis, and earthquakes. The last time Hawaiians had to hear that kind of attack warning was in the 1980s during the Cold War. So this siren, if used as an actual warning, will signal the need to immediately seek shelter due to a potential North Korean missile attack. Meanwhile, Republican Senator Bob Corker will convene a hearing next week on, quote, the executive's authority to use nuclear weapons and the process for executing that authority, unquote. Senator Corker said a number of lawmakers have raised questions about the use of nuclear weapons and the conduct of foreign policy overall. Remember this week there were some Democrats who were trying to stop the president from being able to act in that capacity. Should be an interesting hearing. At the moment, we are awaiting that joint press briefing with President Trump and China's President Xi in Beijing. We're going to take you there live as soon as that begins. In the meantime, our panel is back with us, Congressman Ron DeSantis and Rebecca Heinrichs. Thank you guys for sticking around.
Sure.
All right, I want to play a little bit. There was a lengthy speech the president gave in Seoul, South Korea before he left there yesterday. We want to play a little bit of this idea that he talked about, that the world is responsible for dealing with North Korea.
And to those nations that choose to ignore this threat, or worse still, to enable it, the weight of this crisis is on your conscience.
Who was that for, Rebecca? Because we know that he's in China right now. He's made some pretty pointed remarks, but he's also talked about the need for Russia to get involved with this as well.
Yeah, it's but the primary audiences are both China and Russia, but it's mostly China. You know, China, again, as you mentioned, 90% of North Korea's trade is with China, so they do have the most leverage. But it's Russia too, and Russia tends to look at these opportunities. You know, anytime there's a crisis for the United States, Russia likes to rush to it and sort of exploit that and sort of use it for its own gain. But President Trump, you know, what I liked about that speech so much, it was very Reagan-esque. He laid out not only the problems with the military, the missile problems and the nuclear problems, but the problems with the regime, the nature of the regime. He laid that out, just a stark contrast between the North and the South, and just what an evil dictatorship really that it is. And that also speaks to Kim. You know, Kim is deified in North Korea. And so by President Trump sort of demystifying that and showing the world the human rights violations, that really gets to Kim as well. So clearly President Trump is listening to his analysts, and this is part of the pressure campaign. He's getting into the head of Kim and trying to change his calculus there.
Meanwhile, back here on Capitol Hill, Congressman, I want to ask you about what's happening over in the Senate, because we saw some Democrats raising concerns last week or trying to find some way that they could constitutionally block some actions the president may potentially take with respect to North Korea or the use of nuclear power. Now we have Senator Bob Corker, the chair, very powerful, of the Foreign Relations Committee over there in the Senate. He has been at odds, butting heads with the president. He's been publicly very critical of questioning whether he has the abilities to actually be the president. And now this potential hearing, what do you make of it? Is it aimed at a slap at the president?
It strikes me as kind of a cheap politics, to be honest with you. I mean, I think we know the president's authority as commander-in-chief. The U.S. government has had a pretty consistent policy since the 1940s about that. This president has not said that was going to be reevaluated in any way. He's not threatening to use nuclear weapons unilaterally. So I think he's dealing with difficult situations. But to be honest, I mean, a lot of these senators help pave the way for some of these problems to get worse. I mean, remember how the Senate handled the Iran nuclear deal? I mean, that front-loaded $150 billion in sanctions relief to Iran. Obama's flying pallets of cash in, and that was all through the process that these senators created that effectively green-lighted the deal. I think as tough as the North Korea situation is right now, 5-10 years down the road on a current course with this Iran deal, I think we're going to be in an even more difficult situation with the regime in Tehran and their pursuit of nuclear weapons.
All right, and taking it to a little bit of a lighter note, we saw the president's granddaughter. She speaks Mandarin, and apparently this video has been shared with President Xi. He gave her an A+ and said that it was very nice. I mean, how much do you think those little things help in this relationship, Rebecca? The fact that there is, it seems between these two, a personal connection, that they want to make things work.
They do. You know, there's personalities involved here, and so it matters. You saw this warm greeting that the Chinese gave the President Trump whenever he landed there, the touch with Ivanka and her daughter. I mean, all of this stuff matters, and these are people. So there's personalities at play. But again, this goes back to President Trump's his businessman chops, and he understands the importance of personality, and so he's playing on that as well. But again, we really need China. If there's one thing we can get to come out of this meeting, it's an agreement. You know, President Trump has to be incredibly crystal clear privately with Xi that we are relying on him to fix this North Korea problem with us. Otherwise, there's going to be a problem that everybody doesn't want.
All right, Rebecca, Congressman, thank you both for coming in.
Thank you.
Good to see you tonight. All right, stick around because we'll take you back live to China when the president speaks again. But Night Court is up next. Why some Californians want to ban the national anthem. Stick around to find out. President Trump and his Chinese counterpart, President Xi, now in Beijing, giving a joint statement together. They're both going to speak. It's an important part of the president's trip. He has spoken out just moments ago, talking to some business leaders there, saying that he has concerns about the trade deficit, that he has concerns about security. But he says these two countries, China and the U.S., will work together. He did give praise to China about levying some tougher banking sanctions with regard to North Korea. But he also said, we do expect them, along with that praise, to do more. He says President Xi, when he works really hard, if he wants to get something done, he will get it done. There was a little bit of laughter in the room as he said that, putting a little public pressure on President Xi, as the two of them will have private conversations that we imagine will be much more pointed. In the meantime, this is happening live right now in Beijing. We will take you back there as soon as President Trump takes to the podium so you can hear his remarks as well. He'll depart there and head on to Vietnam next as the next part of his Asia trip. But of course, China considered the linchpin in all of this strategy to rein in North Korea. We'll take you there live when it happens. In the meantime, most watched, most trusted, and most grateful that you spent the evening with us. Good night from Washington. I'm Shannon Bream.